to record. I'm going to wait. There we go. So thank you very much to everyone for joining our Brown Bag Talk today. So this is the first in a series of 6 that we have arranged for this semester. And we've got a lineup of interesting and varied presentations in store, starting with today's presentation on professional learning communities and inclusive pedagogy. And I'm very grateful to today's speaker, Wacango Kimani, and to our discussant, Shakira Akabor. They're my colleagues from Wits School of Education, the Inclusive Education Division there. And I'm grateful for your willingness to be involved. And also to Judith, who volunteered to chair the session. Before I hand over to Judith, just a few notices. If we can keep microphones off during the presentation, and cameras can be on or off, but when people speak, we prefer them to be on. You can write your comments and questions in the chat box at any time. These will be raised during the Q&A at the end. And but also during the Q&A, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, you're welcome to do so. So without taking up any further time, I'm going to hand over to Judith, who's going to take the chair. Thanks, Judith.
Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our first BBT for the second semester. The speaker will give a presentation for 30 minutes. Following that, the discussant is approximately 10 minutes to respond. The final 20 minutes will be open for question and answers. Our speaker today is Wacango Kimani. Wacango Kimani is a PhD candidate at the University of the Witwatersrand. Her current research is on professional learning for inclusive pedagogy. She previously conducted voice research with young schooling mothers. She holds postgraduate qualifications in inclusive education and library science. Wacango Kimani is going to speak to us about professional learning communities for inclusive pedagogy. Inclusive teaching could be developed in and through professional learning communities. Our discussion for today is Shakira Akabor. Shakira Acaba is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Inclusive Education at UNISA. She completed a PhD in 2020 at the University of the Witwatersrand. Shakira's research interests are situated in the reduction of competition in schools and the ways in which we can include all learners in the classroom. Without wasting much of our time, let me hand over to the speaker. Over to you, Wacango.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Johannesburg is nice and sunny, so and I'm grateful for this opportunity. I don't want to end with only thank you, but I want to start with it and the program that has invited me. Professor Melanie Walker, who's the head of the program. And I particularly want to thank Dr. Fenella. She was quiet. We were together at WITS, and then she saw me before she was heading to Free State and never heard from her. And now I know why. So congratulations. I saw you attained your PhD last year. Congratulations. And then as I was preparing this, I looked at some of what Fenella had produced out of her PhD, and I saw that the conversation had an article, and she said she had 4 findings that for employability, which was the reputation of the institution, networks and connections, experience and type of work. So I can see that she's really putting that into practice with her networks and connections. And then for me, wink, wink. I'm hoping that I could be knocking on your doors at the center once I'm done with what I'm doing. But thank you very much. So when I got the invitation, oh, and one other thing is that because I mentioned what Fenella mentioned, that we were together with Shakira at WITS, so hopefully our insider jokes may be understood by everyone, but thank you very much. So when I looked at this idea of a brown bag session, of course it implies an informal and casual engagement, but, I found that there may seem to be a paradox when you have academic engagement, and some of it is, coming from research. But I hope that, what you call the non-threatening audience and my casual background also helps create that space. But it's a good, obviously, it's a good way to share our research when it's in a space where we feel that we're comfortable. So thank you for this opportunity. When I looked at what your program or the center does, I found that we had various similarities, what the center does and what my research also was involved in. And first of all, I want to apologize for any simplification, but it's just to bring out some of the things that I identified were similar between what you do and what my research has also been investigating. So the brown bag sessions, what we're having now is actually a type of community of practice. The SARChI chair is also an NRF, it's an NRF initiative. The transformative approach that is used by the center is an aspect that I found very very interesting. The capability perspective that underpins a lot of what you work on. There's inequality and the aspect of agency. Now, all these pointers I found that we share quite a bit. I share, you share. We share quite a bit about what I was doing. And like I mentioned earlier, wink, wink, hint, hint. But in my research, it was part of an NRF-funded project. It was a university engagement project, WITS, and a local school in Johannesburg. And when we were investigating in particularly the inclusive pedagogy, we were looking at social justice for all learners. And I guess in the same way that the center does it with the capability approach. And the focus on agency, my research also had a specific focus on teacher professional identity and agency. Obviously, some definitions may differ, but where I looked at agency as a contextual engagement, where teachers consider their past, their present, and the future before they consider what they will do. And these were in professional learning communities, which is a type of community of practice. And then also that, just give me a second, sometimes, oh yes, the challenge of these. Yes, many windows. So they were in professional learning communities, and which is a community of practice. And the transformative approach that you take is similar to the critical interpretive perspective I took in my research. So the outline of my presentation, I will give a short background. I'll talk about what professional learning and professional learning communities, how they link with inclusive education, inclusive pedagogy, and the perspective of the critical perspective, and what my findings were. So my research broadly is in inclusive education, and one of the things about inclusive education in South Africa is that even though it was introduced with the White Paper 6 in 2001, teachers continue to say that they feel unprepared or underprepared to teach inclusive classrooms. And in South Africa, inclusive classrooms have been identified as what we call full-service schools, where we have learners who have mild and moderate learning disabilities are learning together with children who, quote unquote, have no difficulties in learning. But we know that I'm going to simplify it that way, but obviously inclusion is much broader than just children with disabilities. It's any child who is at risk of being marginalized or excluded. So that could include children, learners who have various challenges, home challenges, and there are other challenges that are not related to the learner. It's also the school. There's an inflexible curriculum, especially when we are talking about CAPS. It's rather rigid. There are other difficulties that children may face that exclude them or marginalize them when they're in school. Architecture of the school, what is there in a school that can exclude learners, the children's social background, their poverty, and their various, then the list goes on. So it's not only children with disabilities, although that's been a major focus when people talk about inclusion in South Africa. And what has happened in the past is that teachers have been engaged in upskilling, and most of this has been done through a workshop model. And in all these workshop models, this is a quote that we use a lot: you can train us until we are blue in our faces, and we will still struggle. And that teachers continue to say that, whatever training you give us, and training I put in quotes, we are not being able to teach all these learners who are coming from diverse backgrounds, have diverse learning profiles. We are unable to do them. So my research then began to look at, well, how can we do something differently? So my argument is that teacher talk in professional learning communities that focus on how we teach rather than who has a problem could reveal something different and shift that perspective that teachers cannot be trained. It not only reveals a contextual understanding of inclusion and a nuanced interpretation of diversity and difference, it, in the long run, whatever these findings come with, we could now then begin to look at a different way of professional learning for teachers. So what is professional learning? Avoiding terms like teacher training, and in my research, we're looking, and even in terms of professional learning, we're looking at beyond looking at teachers as being trained. When we look at trained, is that there's a fixed way of doing something. But in learning, we are saying teachers have you acknowledge teachers' agency to be able to make changes, to be able to make difference, to be able to make different decisions that then are specified in probably in curriculums and guidance that teachers are given. So when we talk about professional learning, it's not only post training or post qualification learning. We're talking about learning that even happens while students are in their institutions and post institutions. But my research focuses more after what happens with teachers in the classroom when they're already in service. So sometimes it's been called in-service teacher training or continuous professional development, but using the term professional learning for me highlights that issue of the teacher's agency. Then the concept of the focus on professional identity and agency, I found was an important aspect in professional learning. If we're going to do something different, and if we're going to make changes in how teachers are working in inclusive classrooms, these are new concepts to most teachers. Teachers haven't gone through any inclusive understanding while they were in their initial teacher education. It's now become mandated that all institutions educating teachers must have an inclusion component in their curriculum. Most teachers who are in service right now didn't have that. So professional identity and agency are important when something new is being introduced to people who have in any profession, and specifically in an area that we are talking about in inclusive education. And the other thing is that professional learning. 15 minutes. Ooh, then I need to move very quickly, and I'll probably skip quite a bit. So professional learning that's long-term, school-based, and collaborative, and professional learning communities have been shown to be successful. So when we put all that together, then we find that we found that if we're going to have successful professional learning for inclusion in South Africa, how do we put all these things together? And that's why we determined to use professional learning communities, which focus on, it's an in-school learning program, it's collaborative, it's long-term, and teachers are working in a discursive environment, and there's a professional practice that they are focusing on. In our particular case, we were looking at inclusive pedagogy when we define inclusion as a critical project. Previously, it's just been considered as learners coming from who have been excluded into the classroom. But we're looking at it, if you're going to look at it as a critical project, how inclusion began. It began as a way to problematize the way education is carried out, which definitely excludes many. What does that mean? And then there was also that we wanted to look at inclusive pedagogy as an approach and not as a specific way of teaching. For example, here in South Africa, we have workshops on differentiation. So we don't want to look at a specific way of teaching. We're looking at it, how do we consider all learners and not some of the learners or most of the learners? How do we have an approach that has all learners involved? And what we came up with in this particular project was the inclusive pedagogical approach in action that was developed in Scotland, and it has been found to, we looked at it, and so it can work also in South Africa. So my research then looks at, this one has those, well, it's the middle point is that how, when these three, why isn't this, something's not showing? It's not showing, but in the middle of those three, of these circles is teacher talk. How can I was investigating teacher talk when we bring all these things together. And the reason for teacher talk is because it then, I could then analyze teacher talk and identify aspects of identity and agency from how they discussed these topics. Now the topics were, these were the topics, various topics in a school in Johannesburg, and we went through a process in a three-year program where teachers discussed these different topics. And so in looking at inclusive pedagogy as a critical project, this was at a time, was just about the time of, the Fees Must Fall protests. And we found that, there was a disconnect between, the peaceful PLCs, now that the pictures on the left, I think it would be your left, it's my left, where teachers are discussing these topics around a table, they're peaceful. How are we engaging with inclusion as a critical project as we are seeing it happening on the ground in our universities? And of course, that's a whole discussion. But among the things that I looked at as teachers were talking about inclusion, I needed to identify how are their critical engagements with these topics, revealing dominant ideologies, power considerations, the societal context. How are these teachers engaging with these ideas? And in the end, my findings, I will only focus on two aspects that I want to deal with. There are various things that have come out, but one of the major findings that I have when the teachers talked about inclusion, they were I found there were two major themes, what I called inclusive talk and difference talk. And in these two, I saw them as a counterpoint. I don't know if it's a betrayal, but I was one time a teacher of music. And when you have two tunes going on together, they are not clashing, but it's a melody that's happening with these two lines going on together. And in this counterpoint, I found that inclusive talk showed that teachers were willing to teach all learners, regardless of the challenges that the teachers have or the learners have, and they are willing to do so. So their agency comes through that way. But then there was difference talk, and in difference talk, it was yes, we can do inclusion, but. And the but brings out quite a number of aspects about how education is perceived in classrooms, how it's what are the programs, what is the curriculum. So it brings out all the issues that we know are problematic that teachers have to grapple with at each time. However, the difference talk had also aspects of deficit. However, I did not want to call it deficit talk, because what's been happening is that when we have, even though I appear to be having a binary, when teachers are not practicing inclusion, the research often says they are not inclusive, or there's that binary that there's inclusion and deficit, or inclusion, not inclusion. And in trying to avoid that binary, I said I want to call it difference talk, where they are grappling with the issues that create difficulties for learners and difficulties for the teachers. And in so doing, in saying this, what I'm bringing out the fact that I do not want to create the perspective that teachers have are deficit in their practices. They are grappling with what's going on, they're grappling with their context, and in that case, we cannot say that they are not inclusive. They are looking at what is my context, and how is my context creating difficulties for the learner, and also giving me challenges as I practice inclusivity. And these are some of the examples of the issues that the teachers brought out. They're systemic issues, and this was a time of the ANAs, and the teachers are saying, I will teach inclusively, but when you come to the, at the time, the ANAs, and even now the continuous assessments that continue, is that there is no consideration of learners, and that there isn't any consideration that the learners have any challenges. So in that case, the teachers are saying, how then can I be inclusive when I need to grapple with some of these things? Another example is where the teachers are actually saying, is this really inclusion? And for them, what it comes out to show is that as they discuss their teaching, they're also bringing out the concept that they may not understand some of these things. So there is in professional learning, there need to be some balances between what is inclusion as a social justice project. And so what I conclude is that when you look at teacher discussing inclusive pedagogy as they're learning how to teach inclusively, there is a nuanced interpretation of difference. We cannot just say that it's just a binary. That's one. And we also cannot just say that that even when they're grappling with the issues of their learners, they are actually identifying that different learners have different issues, which is a very inclusive perspective, but we cannot just blanketly determine that there's only a binary when we are looking at learners. And so that was the main one of the main findings. But among the other findings in my research were about teachers' agency, being able to see how teachers are looking at how they are making their decisions, we can see how they are developing their identities as inclusive teachers, even though we cannot say that they are inclusive teachers, because this was just a focus on what are they saying in the professional learning communities. And then we also saw that with a critical 5 minutes, with a critical perspective, thank you. With a critical perspective, we are able to look at contextual challenges, and we're not going to just look at teachers within a workshop and just say we are giving them lessons on differentiation. Professional learning has got to be much broader than just one workshop, and we say we have done it, and there is a word in South Africa, we have been workshopped, or workshop people. Okay, that's a new word that is being used, has been used a lot, but that shows that professional learning is not being considered as a long-term in-school collaborative program. It's a one-off that everything works out well. And also finding out that well-facilitated professional learning communities can provide an environment for teachers to challenge their own perceptions about what it means to teach inclusively, and also to challenge each other and be accountable to one another. And finally, that from my findings, hopefully I could go beyond that, is how can we use this tool, the inclusive pedagogical approach in action, as in South Africa, that is contextually relevant. So with that, conclusively, we, well, not conclusively, in closing, I would say that there are promises of professional learning communities, especially when we look at it from a critical lens. We're looking at challenging exclusion. We're looking at how teachers will build their professional repertoire. We are identifying that teachers have an aspect, they have a say in how teachers engage with learners, because the way sometimes teachers are being presented, even in the media, is that they have no say in what goes on in school. So it's also identifying their agency. And then finally, it's their non-prescriptive lessons. It's non-prescriptive engagement. We're not saying this is the only and one and only way. However, there are caveats, as in all situations. Can this form of professional learning dislodge such firmly held beliefs about what it means to be inclusive, even society's perspective of who should be in class and how should we be teaching? And also that considering that inclusive pedagogy is for all teachers, whether they did it in their initial teacher education or not. So thank you very much. I'm closing now. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. And in looking at what I was saying, that the complementarities of my research and the center, I can see how we are doing things. We are actually on the same page. And my final acknowledgement is to my supervisors, because this is a PhD research, Professor Walton and Professor Brody, and also the NRF as a major funder. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wacango, for such an informative and insightful presentation. I will hand over to our discussant, Shakira. Hand over to you, Shakira.
Thank you so much, Judith. And thank you, Wacango, for that really interesting and engaging presentation. I really liked the way you went through how professional learning communities are really very important to inclusive pedagogy. And you had also mentioned that well-facilitated PLCs can benefit teachers and, of course, schools and thereby learners. But the question is then, do schools know about the value of these PLCs? Do they engage in sessions, perhaps amongst their own staff? We obviously see, I mean, schools meet a lot, teachers meet a lot. They meet in the staff room. They talk about a lot of things. You had mentioned they have negative teacher talk. They talk about other learners. But do they actually meet to talk about their own professional development? They are workshopped, as you explained to us. And, workshopping is a very, every school must do so many CPD points, I think, in a year, each teacher needs to do. So workshops are very much part and parcel of South African schools. But how does this engagement that you're talking about in professional learning communities, how does it pan out at schools? What's the reality of PLCs? Do schools actually know about the value of these? Do they know what it is? Can they engage in their own sessions, or can they form perhaps sessions with other schools? And then perhaps, is there somebody, because you had mentioned well facilitated, is there somebody in a school that can be considered their so-called inclusion or diversity officer, or some kind of an inclusion person that's like their go-to person, if they're not sure, like they're not sure, am I doing this inclusively? Am I teaching this maths lesson or whatever properly? Am I being inclusive in my pedagogical aspects of my lesson? And who can I then turn to when I need this kind of guidance? I know there's a lot of questions there, Wacango. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Are you done? Or
Yeah.
do you
Well, there is more, but I think if I'm going to go on, it's a lot. So
yes,
yeah,
okay. Thank you so much. Should I respond, or should I wait for the?
I'd like to hear your thoughts on actually encouraging PLCs in normal, ordinary schools.
Okay, thanks for that question. PLCs have actually been are encouraged by the department. There are guidelines that have been published. So these are actually you can even go onto the department's website and actually download the program, the how to facilitate PLCs. So PLCs have begun in schools, and some. For example, I know there was a project in actually in the Free State where PLCs for inclusive education per se were piloted in for various schools. PLCs are also are used a lot in mathematics. So the concept of PLC is slowly coming into the lexicon of professional learning. However, like in most cases that, for example, even in my research, is the issue of when are teachers being engaged for professional learning? Is it being prioritized within the school program, or is it always after school and over the weekends? And teachers have said that over and over again. Weekends, during the holidays, after schools, these are not really ways that we prefer. So yes, it's an issue that needs to be considered. How do we engage PLCs within the school day? So that would be a challenge, because you've got to have a number of hours for each subject. So, but I suppose a step in the direction. But PLCs are definitely a concept that's taking root. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Wacango. Can I go ahead then with the second part of, or would you like to open up to the audience, or?
I think go ahead, Shakira.
Okay, so the second thing, we spoke about PLC specifically, but I know it forms part of the broader value on diversity and inclusion. And, I know that some of the corporate companies, just from my experience, I've met somebody from RMB actually, and they have a diversity and inclusion officer. And obviously that person's job is to make sure that nobody's rights are trampled on, and that, whatever issues of diversity and inclusion that needs to be brought to the fore in the company are actually dealt with, sufficiently. Perhaps such a concept, I'm not sure, it's just something that popped into my head. Perhaps such a concept can be introduced to schools. Do you think it would work? Do you think that perhaps schools can be encouraged to do this, and maybe that person can then be trained into running the PLC at the specific school? So they're obviously going to be teachers that you said they can use their agency, they can encourage inclusion, they can encourage inclusive pedagogy, and they can do that within their own classrooms. But clearly teachers also work with their HODs, they work with other teachers, especially if there's like more than one maths teacher, for instance, in grade 8, then there has to be some kind of parity, across the classrooms and how they're actually teaching. So there has to be some standards that would be common to the school. And I do understand that, yes, there's agency obviously in the classroom, but I don't know if perhaps one person appointing a person, during COVID, we had some kind of like a COVID compliance person that every school had to have. I don't know, if possible, maybe schools can do such a thing. Do you think there's any value in such a thing?
Well, actually, the concept of, can I respond, or do I take it back to you, Judy? Oh, you're muted.
You can go ahead and respond, then I'll get to a question in the chat after your response.
Okay, all right. In 2001, when inclusive education was introduced into South Africa, the department had hoped that it would be a progressive program in which we would be converting schools as full service schools. Unfortunately has happened is that the conversion into full service schools, what was considered an inclusive school, would mean it would have various resources, the architecture would change, there would be various staff, which include a psychologist and other support learning staff. So that has happened in some schools. However, the department actually suspended converting schools because already the ones that had been identified as full service schools were not actually functioning as school service schools. So in 2016, 17, it was suspended. And then in 2020 or 2021, Equal Education did a research around the country, and they're saying, why should we have some full service schools and others not? We need to have a program for all schools to be full service schools. So I suppose the challenge right now is, how do we have inclusion in all schools? But the good thing that's happening now is that because of the minimum requirements of teacher education that was revised, it means that every university must have all new teachers since, I think, 2019 must have inclusive education as one of their subjects in initial teacher education. So the new group of new teachers that are coming out of all our universities all have some inclusion lessons. So in that way, that's a beginning, or a way that inclusion is now going to become going into schools, rather than trying to convert only converting mainstream schools and regular schools into inclusive schools. So I'm not into what is happening at the department, but that definitely, those are at least the initial teacher education I believe is a good step towards having inclusion out there, rather than just waiting for so-called workshops.
Okay, thank you so much, Wacango. And thank you. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you very much, Shakira. There is a question in the chat, Wacango. It says, I wonder how PLCs might work in the higher education environment. The question comes from Fenella.
Okay, so communities of practice is what we have, and communities of practice, I didn't go through the theory of it, is the theory mainly attributed by Wenger, and he has the whole book on communities of practice, and that happens everywhere. What we are doing right now is actually a community of practice. If it was sustained and we are learning from it and putting these lessons into our work. However, PLCs are a specific form of communities of practice that have been formalized, in a sense, as aspects of teacher education in schools. So I believe there would be PLCs there could be PLCs in every other place, but PLCs have been specifically identified as a community of practice for teachers, as an aspect of how do we get teachers to use a particular professional practice, look at what's happening in their classroom, engaging it with it, and seeing how can we learn and improve student outcomes. So that's what a PLC is that we are learning together, using what we are gaining from our classrooms, from our teachers, and then from our students, and then going into to change that. So in that sense, I guess a PLC would work for people who are in higher education. That would be among the teaching staff, when you are engaged in learning. So I believe it could work as a community of practice, but I guess it would be, how would you develop it? Because it could be per department, it could be all. And I'm sure if you look through your own universities and all our universities, there are communities of practice. The only thing is that, are we calling them that? Sometimes people say they are like this, brown bag lunch, brown bag session. How are we engaging it? But the formality of it, I suppose, is necessary so that you can actually see outcomes that are for the person learning, the participants, and those who they are serving. So I suppose it could work, and it probably exists. Yes.
Thank you very much, Wacango. I don't know if you answered Fenella, but there is a hand from Akakuluvewa. Yes, you can go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thank you so much for this informative presentation. I'm Aka from Zambia, but a student at the University of Bristol in the UK. My question is on the issue of sense of belonging. Did you look at the aspect of sense of belonging when it comes to these professional learning communities? Because I'm seeing it as one thing that can enhance teachers' participation in these communities if they feel part and parcel of those particular communities, not in the sense of just for the sake of credits, because even in Zambia as well, we have a teaching council, and for teachers to renew their licenses, they would need credits from such activities. So you'd find that you may have teachers participating in those activities, not for the sake of learning, but just for the sake of meeting the requirements. So did you look at the issue of sense of belonging, not for the sake of credits, but for the sake of teachers equipping themselves with the skills that are required to improve their classroom performance? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you are going to respond to one or more questions at a time.
Maybe more questions so that I don't know, another question, or I don't know, you decide. I'm flexible.
All right, there is another question from Prof. Melanie Walker in the chat, which says, I would like to hear more about Wacango's methods, how many teachers, how many schools, how many discussion workshops with these teachers, and over what period? How was the data analyzed and interpreted conceptually? And what were the contextual challenges facing teachers, which were enabling and which were constraining? And would diversify, as in CA, be more helpful concept than difference? And what does inclusive pedagogy look like in action or practice?
Okay. All right, maybe I could take those two. I think Professor Walker's question is pretty long. So Aka, thank you very much. The issue of sense of belonging, among the things about the PLCs, let me show you a slide. So the PLCs are meant to be identified as, I mean, when you're setting them up, they're meant to be a cohesive group, but there's a specific practice. Teachers are engaging with their own practice. They are engaging with what they are learning from. So they usually have artifacts from their classrooms. So it depends on how the PLC is developed. In our particular case, because the teachers were required to be part of it. Yes, there could be some resistance, but resistance is also a part of agency. So those are things that needed to be considered. And in this particular professional learning communities, they did not have specific credits for this particular engagement. The other thing that helped with our particular professional learning communities was that the school management and the school principal would give the program for the whole year, the topics, when we are meeting, when the teachers are expected to learn. And many of the topics came from the teachers. These are the challenges we are having. So for example, among the topics I mentioned was the issue of effective listening. The teachers felt the learners do not listen, they do not listen. So we as a university worked with them and would create program for their discussion, and they would come with the issues that they are facing with the learners. And by the time they are leaving the session, which the session was 1 hour, by the time they're leaving the session, sometimes some of the sessions actually worked out with lesson plans, where the teachers left with lesson plans for a particular topic. So that sense of, rather than belonging, I would say that sense of commitment to learning comes from the fact that you're creating a safe space for teachers to be critical. And they're also bringing in their actual challenges from the classroom. It's not necessarily about people from external telling them this is what you need to do. So that sense, that sense of cohesion is that sense of we are doing something real, it is tangible, it's ongoing, creates that accountability. But the other thing about a PLC, it's meant to be a sense of care that permeates through the school. So if a school already has a lot of tension, PLCs may not work. And PLCs also determine, Shakira was asking, how are they developed? So some could be developed in a subject within the maths, and maths many schools have used PLCs for mathematics to improve mathematics learning in South Africa. So it could be a department during their meetings, how they work out some of the challenges they're having. So I don't know whether that in a sense is a theoretical answer. In this particular case, I personally did not look at whether there was a sense of belonging. There were some complaints about these things are coming too late in the afternoon. It's difficult for us to concentrate. So those are some of the issues that I was trying to respond to Shakira about when the lessons are coming up. Now, to answer Professor Melanie's question, I did jump this because of time. So the PLCs were held at that during those three years, and all the staff were required to attend. So the program was set at the beginning of the year. So all the teachers would meet, and I've shown you the picture there. So we would meet on a certain date, and ideally they would sit around a table per grade. So grade 1 teachers would sit around, grade 2. But one of the problems that we had was that the teachers felt they were afraid about, they were concerned about the audio recordings. And so sometimes they wouldn't sit as teachers in the same grade, because they felt, oh, they will identify me and they will hear that I'm complaining about this. So that was one of the challenges we had. So we audio recorded the meetings per class, per group, and we transcribed the discussions. The PLC discussions were a collaborative development in terms of the teachers would say, these are our problems, and we as the university would now go and create, we were calling them discussion guidelines. And the teachers, one teacher would be given a session, an orientation session before the actual PLCs, so that the teacher can then guide the discussion with the rest of the teachers. So that's the way it was held. When we looked, so that this was the process, the teachers would identify a topic, we would develop worksheets and guidelines. Then there would be a facilitator meeting, and then we'd have the session. And then, like I had mentioned, these were the topics. There were one per term, one per term, except in the second year where we had in one term, we had two. The issue of contextual challenges. Now, as the teachers, I'm not too sure what you meant by contextual challenges. Is it the contextual challenges for the PLCs? Yes, like I've mentioned, coming at the end of the school, the teachers are tired. Those are some of the contextual challenges that appeared. They would come in as another talk I described in my data as other talk, where teachers were saying, hurry up, we are tired, we are hungry. But in terms of, so those were some of the contextual challenges. The other, in terms of contextual challenges, the teachers, as they discussed inclusive pedagogy, for example, in effective listening, or one of them was, for example, in cooperative learning, the teachers would talk about we can't create cooperative group, what people would call group work. Our classes are too many. We are too many in the classroom. There, by the time you have put them in groups, the lesson is over. So some of those contextual challenges do come up in topics like that, where yes, we'd want to do cooperative learning, we want to do group work, but how do we do it? We are so tight. We can't move the children can't move in the classrooms. And then in terms of diversity, we use the IPPA, the one I talked about, as the inclusive pedagogical approach in action, and this is where difference is accounted for as an essential aspect of human development. It has nothing to do with disabilities. It isn't only about people who have one challenge or another. It's every person is different. So when you look at difference in that sense, that's where I suppose that responds to that question of yours about diversity. Diversity is every human being is diverse, any classroom. And I think it was a fallacy for us to say diversity is now when we have inclusive education, because even in this group here, where in a sense everyone can hear me speak English, and can hear, I suppose we can see. I don't know what adaptabilities we've created, accessibility we have created in this particular group of about over 17 people. We are all diverse. So when we look at inclusion from that perspective, then we are not going to start talking about only children who have identified disabilities. I'm not too sure whether I have now answered your question. So in terms of specifically about diversity, the IPPA, why we chose it is that it doesn't determine that only certain children go through challenges. It is all the teachers to look at every child and see every learner is different, but we have more things in common than we have in difference. And that's where in a school like where we had, it was a full service school, you have the support of the special needs educator, we have the school psychologist. And then the issue of diversity is also dealt with when we are looking at how teachers can begin to identify that they can teach all children, especially because they have gone through initial teacher education. And the fact that we have the PLCs, they are learning together and learning to work with each other and also to include other professionals, then we are looking at diversity in its as broad perspective as is possible. I hope in that quick way I have at least identified some of the, responded to some of the questions that Professor Walker had.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Wacango. There is a final question from Edward. It says, how do conventional high-stake assessments in classrooms like a grade 12 class create dilemmas for PLCs Was there any evidence of this in your study?
So, like I mentioned, the one that, oh yes, Dr. Melanie asked how did we code? So there was thematic coding. So, for example, in this particular example I've shown here, even though this was in the primary school, the idea that the teachers identified, we have these constraints that there's a fixed exam, and how is the exam is not taking care of the diversity. So in a sense, the challenges of teachers having to teach inclusively when an external exam or an external assessment does not consider that. But there's one policy in South Africa, it's called, the short form is the SIAS. And now this policy helps teachers say, okay, my student is having these challenges. Can we have these different accommodations so that in the end, they could have a scribe who would, if the child cannot write, or they would have other accommodations. So for the grade 12 session, the grade 12 space, the teachers would need to then look at that policy and see how can we help a learner, a student who is unable to do the exam as is set for everybody else, but have accommodations for them. So that's where that policy can be engaged, so that a learner is not excluded or marginalized when it comes to doing their final exam. I hope that helps and explain that.
I don't know when Edward is answered, but there is a comment from Fenella which says, I think your distinction between training and learning is important in enabling oral development of agency for educators. And then Aka says, thank you so much for the response.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Some more questions from the floor.
Thank you. I acknowledge the acknowledgement. Thank you, Sarah. So, clap.
Any questions?
Or comments?
Comments? Yes.
Maybe just a comment.
Yes.
As a follow-up to the question that I had asked with regards to sense of belonging. I know you might have not looked at it in your study, but I feel some of the key points can help. I mean, with regards to those others that want to look at the same area. So I was looking at one point I read a peer-reviewed article on emotion matters and 4 key relationships in teaching and learning in higher education. I think it was authored by Kathleen Quinlan, something like that. So in that article, she was looking at how issues of sense of belonging, emotion can help improve teaching and learning in higher education. So I felt that this can also help with teachers, them being adults who would fit into learning in higher education. So she mentioned 4 key relationships, but I think 3 apply to teachers, which is relationship with the subject, relationship with their peers, as well as relationship with themselves. So it was argued that these 3 relationships, once learners or let's say teachers in this case have that relationship with their subject, they would want to learn more how best they can teach, or how best they can employ inclusive pedagogy in their classrooms. Then that can help them have that intrinsic interest in learning more about how best they can do that, and that can help them be open to such learning opportunities as professional learning communities. Then there was also an issue of relationship with peers, that the way one relates to their peers can enhance what they learn, can enhance their interest in always being with their fellow teachers. And then the last one was that of relationship with self, that one is able to be open to learning if they realize that they can have discomforts in the way they do their teaching. There can be times when new information contradicts what they have been doing for a long time. So I felt that I think in future, probably these relationships with the subject, relationship with peers, and also relationship with the teachers themselves can play a key role in improving the way professional learning communities are conducted. Thank you so much.
Okay. Can I respond quickly? PLCs, professional learning communities, of course, are conducted in an ethic of care. So all those aspects are actually taken care of. So I suppose each of them would be dealt with, but it's a really wide area, but it has been shown to not only improve teachers' learning and also shown to improve the outcomes for learners. So yes, definitely the PLCs are a definite good way of teacher learning. And I want to hand over to the chair, but say thank you. I've seen all I've seen the comments. Thank you very much, Faith, and everyone else who has. I want to acknowledge all those comments and thank you. Thank you very much, Fenella and Judith. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wacango, for such an excellent presentation. I would like to thank our discussant, Shakira. Thanks very much to everyone who has attended the BBT. I think we can call it a day, but before we go, let us give a round of applause to those who were involved in the session.
Thanks to everyone for attending.
Bye-bye.
Well done, Judith. Bye, Ollie.